The Sony a7 III in 2024, let's get into it. Last year, I traveled to Indonesia and Jordan with some friends, and I was blown away by what the 6-year-old camera was capable of. So much so that I bought it as a B cam. Let me explain. Many of my friends have been using the a7 III as their A cam for years, while I've been using the a7 IV on these trips. And while the a7 III does have some disadvantages, I would argue that if you're on a budget, you're more than okay purchasing the a7 III in 2024 as a hybrid shooter, especially if it means you have money for a nicer lens. Hey, I'm Maddie, and if you're new here, we talk gear. All the photos and videos that you see today were shot on the a7 III, and if you look down in the description, I'll also share some links of the raw photos and the S-Log2 video if you want to play around with the color grading or slap your own presets on the photos. Also, if you stick around to the end of the video, I'll be sharing my best log settings for video on the a7 III, and you're not going to want to miss that. Let's talk price first, because I'm definitely a budget conscious filmmaker. So if you buy what we're shooting on right now, the a7 IV, it does come with a kit lens, and that's $2,699 US. And there are some obvious advantages to that. But if you buy this guy here, I picked it up for $1,100 US, and you slap one of my favorite lenses on it, the Sigma 24-70, then you're looking at a camera, body, and lens bundle that comes in at $2,300, which is $400 less than the a7 IV and the kit lens. So there's definitely some things you need to consider when choosing the a7 III or a7 IV in 2024, and that's why we're going to explore the a7 III in this video. Really quick, if you're finding value in this video, it goes a really long way if you could just leave a like. 3, 2, 1. Thank you so much. Let's dive back in. First, I want to talk about photography on the a7 III, and if you're thinking about picking it up this year, it's definitely a good value. It has a 24 megapixel sensor, which a lot of people would say is dated, but at the end of the day, if you're getting good composition in your camera and you don't need to crop in too much in post, 24 megapixels is amazing. The autofocus on the a7 III still holds up. It has a viewfinder, and one of my favorite functionalities of it is that it has 2 SD card slots so that you can dual record video or photo. Why did I say it like that? Photo. If you shoot a lot of weddings or events in particular, it's super important to have the 2 SD card slots. It's not worth risking it, so redundant recording is necessary, especially when I've had cards fail on me in the past. The quality of the back LCD screen on the a7 III is unfortunately not as good as the a7 IV, and it's a reason why a lot of people upgrade. Not only is it a quality improvement on the a7 IV, but you get a fully articulating screen as well. But as a photographer, we're talking about photography right now, is that super important to you? For me, I often use the viewfinder. If you bought the cheaper option a7C, which you could do, you'd get a fully articulating screen. However, then you lose the 2 SD card slots. There's no such thing as a perfect camera, is there? The a7 III shoots 10 frames per second in photography, which is great, but be wary of buffer times. You might have to wait a little bit for the card to process the actual files. One last thing I'll mention before diving into video is that this camera is weatherproof, which I absolutely love, and what makes it a little bit more professional than some of the other cameras on the market. Just make sure your lens is weatherproof as well, and then you can go brave the elements. While the a7 III is noticeably dated in some areas in 2024, to me, it still holds up, and you can definitely use it professionally. With that being said, let's talk about the cons of video first on the a7 III. And the first one I want to talk about is overheating. So yes, it shoots in 4K 24 frames per second. However, only up to about 25 minutes in 30-degree weather. So if it's a hot sunny day, you're gonna have to start monitoring your 4K 24 around the 20-minute mark just to make sure it's not gonna overheat. And sure, that's annoying, but even some of the more recent cameras like the a6700 struggle with overheating. So at the end of the day, this isn't a deal breaker for me, and it might not be for you. Next, a super annoying point about this camera is that it's dated in terms of having a record limit internally. So it has 30-minute record limit, or I think mine shuts off at like 2950, something like that. But I have a hack for that as well. So what you could do is you could take a intervalometer, you can buy them on Amazon, plug it in and have it set to a 30-minute timer. Then when that camera automatically shuts off, what's going to happen is that intervalometer is going to press the shutter button and restart the video. And the best part about that is that if you're busy with your A-cam going around an event or a wedding ceremony, something like this, you can just trust that, yeah, you've lost maybe like 20 or 30 seconds of footage, but your camera's gonna reset itself and then you can shoot more video. Even with the intervalometer, you're probably gonna wanna shoot in 1080p because that will allow you not to overheat. Another downside of this camera is that it shoots 8-bit color in video. And if you don't know too much about color space, 8-bit versus 10-bit color is kind of like editing a JPEG versus a RAW photo. The amount of flexibility you have in post to edit your colors is noticeable. However, if you get your video and exposure settings right in camera on the a7 III, this can easily be used as a professional video camera in 2024. We talked a little bit about the back LCD screen when we were talking about photography on this camera. For video, if I'm gonna be shooting an outdoor event like a wedding, what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna attach my monitor to it and be fine. So I won't have to worry about that back LCD kind of sucking in sunlight. Lastly, frame rate. So this shoots 4K up to 30 frames per second or 1080p up to 120 frames per second if you're in need of slow motion. Oh yeah, and in-body stabilization, it has it, so that's great, but it's nowhere near as good as the a7 IV's active stabilization. So as promised, I wanted to offer the best settings for video if you picked up this camera or you've never really been able to dial in your cinematic settings. The a7 III has been a bit of a mystery in terms of choosing the best picture profile and gamut pairing. So I interviewed a bit of my friends who have owned this camera for a while, and these were their findings for the best video settings. Definitely play around with these settings yourself, but this is a really good baseline for you to start and get really good kind of cinematic level video. So the first thing you can do is go to Picture Profile 7, which is S-Log 2. Then you can go to Color Mode, ITU 709, Matrix. And this gamut is the best for retaining shadows. However, I have been told that the S gamuts also work really good for the color mode, so try both. For best in-camera exposure when you're using these settings for video, I would recommend shooting at plus 1.7 for the metering. And in terms of the metering, you should be set to entire screen average or multi should work too. Just trust me, this is a great baseline and you're welcome. So let's finish with a compliment sandwich for the Sony a7 III. The first one I want to talk about is incredible battery life. Also, I have like 6 of these in my house because I have the a7 IV and a7 III. They're interchangeable. And yeah, nothing wrong with the battery life. It's actually like a big pro for me. We need to sandwich 2 compliments about this camera, but in the middle needs to be a downside. So I gotta say the menu system. I'm used to the newer menu system on the a7 IV. Again, this isn't a deal breaker and it takes some getting used to, but once you know where everything is, it's a breeze. And lastly, another compliment for the a7 III is the selection of E-mount lenses that Sony has. It's been over a decade and Sony allows for third-party manufacturers like Tamron, Sigma, TT Artisan, Rokinon, all these companies to make cheap budget lenses that are insane values. So to wrap this up, in my opinion, the a7 III is still an amazing value for photographers or hybrid shooters in 2024. I would say that if you're on a budget, I would actually recommend the a7 III and a nice lens like the 24-70 Sigma over the a7 IV and a kit lens if you are strapped to a budget. Obviously, the a7 IV has been incredible. It's my favorite camera I've ever owned, but again, if you're on a budget, I would still say the a7 III is phenomenal. For camera gear, it's all situational, and unfortunately, you need to know what you're gonna be shooting in order to buy the best camera for you. So before purchasing, really sit down, maybe write out your ideas for photography, for video. What do you mostly shoot before deciding which camera to buy? Again, this isn't for video first shooters, but it does offer a really good hybrid option. That's it for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Matty out. Peace.